Nothing.
Just don't check.
Yeah. It's terrible.
It should go off this.
It's treating right now.
Okay. And I think a little bit unrealistic also.
It's washing more slides. What is Go sit there.
You can see it's mine as well.
Is it what are you gonna use? Nothing.
Use my instinct.
Yes, I can't believe it.
Hearing skills.
And that's true, you can't see.
Where did you go now before the exams?
This is irritating.
Now it's trust you. Now you are disappointing me. Why are you playing love songs? You are disappointing me.
I mean, look at it.
Yeah.
He's just. You better now, Sharon.
Yes.
So when are you guys going to
So I have I don't be at
you're not gonna stay for a while, get to expose it.
here for like we're gonna be here for 10 days.
Or
And obviously mine is exactly the same. We can only second week month. Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna
So probably gonna leave so otherwise I could never enter this country again. I think a few experiments.
yeah. But how
I've been more than a million years.
Oh, then
I see, they were the people who were in my car when my car didn't want to start. Were you at the park?
no.
No. I left the, I don't know, the car on or something. So when we get into the car, we assumed the battery didn't work. So somebody had to, so they were all just arrived in South Africa in my car with all the luggage, and then my car didn't want to go on.
Sorry, I had to go through that.
But Zuki helped me.
Oh, okay. Did he jumpstart the car?
Yes.
This one.
Yeah, those are the things that they killing.
Absolutely.
Or you do one first. Hold on. On here. Yes. So we had multiple. And kind of see some things.
These guys are so loose. You get like this. It's and they have like a logo that went off that certain price. And if you read it, you will like, yeah, no.
I didn't actually talk about that.
Somehow I prefer that. Then you can kind of plan it all like you know, when you start as a level from his client says, "Can you guys give me 5 minutes? I have to work my glasses." They would wait for me, you know? It's a very kind, but somehow like instinctive.
All right. Oh, I'm gonna get this over. Yeah, now the.
Not you?
No? Apparently not. Otherwise, mine would be doing it.
We know you present them.
Huh?
Are they
I
gonna?
will be presenting.
Okay.
Just not.
Who's presenting results?
Right, we're going to go into our second session, and to try and just get the timing right, we're going to have lunch at 2, and so we're going to have Joss's session a little bit later, and we're going to start with Ray's session on wavefront aberrometry.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. If you ever get to Texas in March, the blue bonnets are very beautiful. I recommend it highly. Okay, so we're going to talk about the basics of retinal image quality. And in particular, we're going to talk about the role of diffraction and wavefront error as a function of pupil size. So it's long been known, as you can see by this quote, which says, "Now it is not too much to say that if an optician wanted to sell me an instrument that had all these defects of Himmel's eye, I should think myself quite justified in blaming his carelessness in the strongest of terms and giving back his instrument. Of course, though, I shall not do this with my eyes, and shall be only too glad to keep them as long as I can, defects and all. Still, the fact that however bad they may be, I can get no others, does not diminish at all their optical defects, so long as I can maintain the narrow but indisputable position of a critic on purely optical grounds." So most colleges and schools of optometry and I've taught both in ophthalmology and in optometry, use periaxial optics approach. And it's used to teach ophthalmic clinicians the optics of the eye and the typical major defects of the eye. And it's a very good first order approach, but it does not explain the patient's complaints as a function of pupil size. Now, how many people run into the person that doesn't want to dilate it, right? Because they see bad. Well, these are the very optical errors that Himmel was talking about. Patients' complaints can't explain all the complaints as new corrections are added to the market that induce higher order aberrations. For instance, to increase the depth of field in optics, anything you want to do, there's a compromise. If you want to increase the depth of field, you're going to lose something, right? The complaints of the highly aberrated eye, and I understand that the keratoconus is relatively high in South Africa. You're not going to fix it with sphere and solder. And nor does it adequately describe retinal image quality for the vision scientist. Okay, so one way to gain insight as to what is actually happening is to understand how diffraction as a function of pupil size fundamentally limits the fidelity of the retinal image, and apply Snell's law of refraction for every ray entering the eye. Okay, in reality, you don't do it for every ray, it's infinite, but you do it for a very large sample. Okay, so this is a concept I would love to see brought into both ophthalmology and optometry, right? And it's the tip and tilt. If you talk to any optical engineer, they understand tip and tilt. And I wish that we would teach this because it's a very simple principle. It's a key concept in wavefront air sensing and correction. And for any ray passing through the pupil, and I'll turn my pointer. So here's the pupil, and we're talking about the ray right there. Just that infinitely small place where the cross is, okay? And then you can put the cross anywhere you want to, okay? But for any one ray, the refracting surface is a plane. It's totally flat because it's infinitely small, right? If it's infinitely small, then it only has tip and tilt. It either tips, tip or tilt. Did it backwards. All right. So let's march on. So each ray goes where it goes. It does not necessarily ever cross the optical axis. There's no rule. It goes where it goes. All right. And that's really important. For instance, this gentleman right over here, Larry Titus's eye. So you can't even hear me, but that's all right. We're talking about you, Larry. for his eye. Yep. for Larry's eye, if you take his aberration structure, and it's normal, no ray crosses the optical axis. They come very close, but they don't. So if you know where you'd like each ray to go, then the goal of the correction is to change the tip and tilt of the surface for each ray to direct the way where you want it to go. Okay, that principle will come up over and over here. Okay, and I should tell everybody, I'll give anybody these slides. So if you want the slides, just send me a note and you can have them. So the optics of the eye is the first stage of vision, defining the retinal image. It's an extremely important stage, but it's not the only stage. And I wish to remind everybody before we just go into optics. Okay, the optical quality of the retinal image is primarily defined by pupil size, diffraction, wave aberration, scatter, and chromatic aberration. And the two gray ellipses, let me go back, and the two gray ones we're not going to talk about today. To understand visual image quality, one needs to include in the analysis, if we're going to talk about actual vision now, how the visual system processes the retinal image. For example, the sampling density of photoreceptors. If you put a letter E inside of one photoreceptor, you see a dot, right? So we have a sampling limit. How the visual system processes spatial information, and the spectral sensitivity of the eye, and the list goes on. Topics not covered here, but important in defining retinal image quality. I'm sorry, visual image quality. Okay, so let's talk about diffraction. And I love this definition because it's so ambiguous, right? Any deviation of light rays from a rectilinear path which cannot be interpreted as reflection or refraction. Okay? And that exists. All right, let's start talking about it now a little bit. So if we want to talk about wavefronts and wavefront air, we have to define what a wavefront is. Okay, so a wavefront is, we have an oscillating little point source right here that's sending out its wave of light. And if you connect like phase, it's easier to see on this one, like phase, you've defined a wavefront. So for every ray, just connect the same phase, the same point in the oscillation up and down. Okay, so this is to remind me that screens are flat. And what I'm talking about is three-dimensional. Okay, so if I had a point source of light, it emanates in all directions. And if I connected all of those things, and if I was traveling in a uniform index, right, optical index, so light's all traveling at the same speed, then that is a wavefront. And I could do it infinitely. Wavefront after wavefront after wavefront. So we're going to talk about diffraction in terms of wavefronts here. So to understand diffraction, it's necessary to understand the behavior of a wavefront as it passes through an aperture or an edge, a pupil or a straight edge. Okay, so this is pretty simplistic, but it makes a point. From a ray perspective, we have a point, we have rays shooting off. Rays are always perpendicular to the wavefront. Okay, and we have a secondary wavefront. Then there's a tertiary wavefront. And then there's another wave, and another one, and another one, right? And it goes on and on. Well, if you do that, then we can talk about both unbounded, where for an unbounded system, no pupil, interference effects cause the light to propagate only in the original direction. You put an aperture in, bound the system, then in a bounded system, there's no interference. All the interference effects don't cancel each other. We've wiped out all the rays, all the secondary wavefronts around the edge. They're gone because the pupil cut them off. Okay. All right. So if we look at it like that, then we have this secondary wavefront shooting rays of light right towards the eye. Right. All right. So diffraction occurs all along the propagation of a wavefront. I'm sorry, moving the mic away. I'm used to having a lavalier. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a special case of Fresnel diffraction that occurs in the image plane, on the retina, if you will, of a well-focused eye. Okay, so, and that's called Fraunhofer diffraction. And it occurs in the focal plane of an aberration-free or nearly aberration-free system. Actually, the Fraunhofer diffraction occurs even if you have an aberrated eye. It's just not very pretty. Okay. All right. The Fraunhofer diffraction pattern of an axial point source defines the appearance of the point source in the image plane. Well, so I want you to think about anything you look at. It's made up of millions of points. Your face, the text you look at. Just consider there's 10 billion points all over, right? And each of those are being imaged by the imaging system. And how that imaging system images that point defines the quality of how that point is represented in the image plane. So if it's terrible out of focus, that point isn't small, it's huge. It's imaged out of focus. All right. So there's a representation of a point spread function. So I took one point of light out there in space, imaged it to the image plane, and said, what did it look like? Well, no longer is a point. It has width. It has shape. So Fraunhofer diffraction defines the diffraction limited point spread function in the image plane. And a guy came along named Airy, and he said, well, how do we quantify how big that is? And he said, go to the first time light goes negative, and we'll define that as an Airy's disk. And so this guy, an astronomer, came along and said, we have a way to define this. All right, so we're going to talk about how Airy's disk size varies with pupil size. All right, so the angular radius of the Airy's disk, how well a point is imaged into the image plane, in radians increases as pupil size decreases. So think about it, man. It's an inverse relationship. The smaller the pupil, the bigger the Airy's disk. The bigger the pupil in the perfect system, the smaller the Airy's disk. By this formula right here, right? Here's pupil diameter. And here's the wavelength of light we're considering. And this is an approximate one, and that's why the 1.22. Okay, so as the diameter of the Airy's disk decreases in an aberration-free optical system, the higher the fidelity of the image. And what do we mean by fidelity? It's how well it represents. You buy a high fidelity stereo system, you want the sound to be represented really well, right? So you're going to have a better image if you have a large aperture. And if the system is aberration free. Okay, so said differently, in a perfect optical system, the larger the pupil, the better the image. You say, wait a minute, I don't like my pupil big, right? We'll talk about the other factors in a minute. We're talking about diffraction now. Okay, so here we are comparing the PSF results from a simple plus and minus defocus to a perfect focus. So notice here, let's focus on no air and no higher order aberrations, no astigmatism. This is a perfect optical system. Notice that the point spread gets smaller and smaller as it goes to a larger pupil. That means the fidelity, each one of those points that are imaging every point on your face will be well represented if the pupil's large. Now let's add a little defocus, just simple defocus. Notice how pupil size, as aberration is introduced into the system, that really affects the diameter of your point spread function. All right, so now let's look at it in a real world thing. Let's make some images. Any scene is a collection of points, like we've been talking about. The image of a scene is represented by the point spread function for every point in that scene. So what we learn about the point image can be used to simulate an object. All right, so what are we doing here? All right, we have a perfect optical system. No sphere, no cylinder, no high order aberrations. Okay, and we have a pupil diameter of 4 millimeters. And we have a logmar acuity chart. And here we have a 20/20 line. All right. Okay, so now the only thing I'm going to change is pupil diameter. I'm going to make it smaller. Ah, did it get blurrier? Oh, I have my power cord around my neck. Whoops. Okay, and if I go smaller, no aberrations, smaller. In fact, if you want to get rid of all spatial information, you jam the light through the smallest hole. Okay, so let's move on now. So diffraction, what are the 3 key takeaways that I hopefully conveyed? For any given pupil diameter, diffraction fundamentally limits image quality. In an optical imaging system with no aberrations, the larger the pupil, the higher the fidelity of the image. So no wonder your really good camera lenses that have a big aperture, you pay a lot of money for. These are hard to build. Okay, and because of the effects of diffraction, the normal spherical cylindrical corrected eye is nearly diffraction limited for pupil diameters less than 2 millimeters. So if you want somebody to see like everybody to see alike, correct their sphere and cylinder and give them pinhole glasses. And the vision will be essentially the same for everybody. Not the best way to do it, but it works. Okay, now let's go to wavefront error. We've talked about diffraction. It fundamentally sets the limits. So whatever pupil size you have, the point spread function that's associated with that defines the upper limit. All right, so let's go to things we know. Okay, so we have rays, right? And as we just discussed, wavefronts are perfectly perpendicular to the rays as long as we join the same phase, same part of the wave. All right, now we're going to go through an optical system, right, with a pupil. So after refraction, if it's a perfect optical system, you'll have a spherical wavefront whose center of curvature is at the focal point, right? Radius will get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter as you get there, right? And once we reach the focal point, we'll have the Aries disk for a point source out in space, right? So here we just converted from rays to wavefronts. Now we're going to slowly move into wavefront air, okay? All right, so here we have an ideal eye, no air. We have the perfect wavefront afterwards, got a radius of curvature exactly that length, and it will eventually converge and form a point spread function right there for this bundle of rays coming from a point far away. And an aberrated eye, sphere and cylinder corrected, right? Well, rays don't always come to focus. They sort of come to a focus right here, right? And the wavefront is now distorted. Okay, and thanks to my colleague over here, Dr. Titus, gave me this slide. Key points to walk away from. So all rays from a point intersect at a common point on the retina. This is for an unaberrated eye, right? And we have a spherical wavefront here. The optical distance from the point out here in space, from here far away, to the image point here on the retina is always the same. Now you say, wait a minute, whoa, this path has to be longer than this path. So what in the world does optical path mean? So what is optical path? You take the physical distance and you multiply it times the index. It tripled it. So you would take this distance, multiply it by the index of error, 1. That would be one distance. Then you do the cornea first surface through the cornea, through the corneal back, through the aqueous, through the lens. And in the end, that path is the same as this path in terms of time to get there. They all got there at the same time. Okay? All right. So wavefront converging on the retina is spherical. So in the aberrated eyes, just the opposite. Rays do not intersect at the same point. The optical distance is not the same. And wavefront error is, the wavefront is not spherical, it's distorted. It's not the nice spherical shape. So now we're set to define wavefront error. Aha. People can guess what it is right away, right? You say, I want a perfectly spherical wavefront, and everything that's different from that is the wavefront error. So let's look at that. All right. So here we have the eye. And again, we have the rays coming in. Here's our reference wavefront. And it should actually be right in the exit pupil of the eye. I just put it inside the eye a little bit so we can see it better. All right. And so here's our distorted ray. Here's our fixed ray. And this is all the wavefront error differences. Okay. So you just look at all of this area right in here. This is all wavefront error. Something we don't want. We want to get rid of. Okay. And we get rid of a large part of that with sphere and cylinder, but we don't get rid of it all. Okay. So let's define wavefront error now. So the reference wavefront for distance foveal vision is the cone of light with a radius of curvature equal to the distance to the fovea. Okay, just draw an arc. That's the wavefront you want, right? Now the question is, what do you got? Okay. All right. So now we have a distorted wavefront, right? So by convention, in defining wavefront error over the exit pupil, the refracted, the red wave, the aberrated wavefront, is allowed to advance, keep going, until the wavefront error is 0 in the center of the pupil. Notice that? We let it be 0 there. We just did that by convention. We have to have some rules, right? So it's 0 right there. And then we define the wavefront error in the next couple of slides. So the optical path difference at a particular exit pupil location is the optical path measured perpendicular to the refracted, to the reference wavefront, to the refracted wavefront. And there are different conventions, but this is pretty standard. Okay, so there's the optical error. And for the exit pupil location illustrated here with the white arrow, the refracted error is the refracted wavefront is advanced with respect to the reference wavefront. It's traveled further. Okay, just in front of it. Likewise, in this portion of the wavefront, it's negative. It's typically referred to as retarded with respect to the reference, and it has a negative sign. Now we can plot a map, right? So here's a wavefront error map. First thing you want to look at on a wavefront error map is the step size. Here's a half a micron. That's a pretty big step size. So this is a pretty highly aberrated eye. Okay, green, just like in corneal topography maps, is good. Red or moving into warmer colors is advanced. Cooler colors is retarded. Minus numbers are cooler. Warmer colors are advanced wavefronts by convention. Okay, so now a key point I want you to walk away with, and this is why you don't like your eyes dilated and seeing, right? Notice that as the pupil gets smaller, the wavefront error, the difference between the reference wavefront and the measured wavefront gets smaller. Yet the degree of myopia, this is simple myopia right here. The wavefront's going to converge at a point in front of the retina, right? Whereas this one's going all the way to the retina. Simple myopia. But notice there's a big pupil, there's a small pupil. The wavefront error, the difference between these two suddenly got smaller. -2 diopters myopia. You tell someone you have -2 diopters myopia, does vision change with pupil size? Ah, that's what you think, but it does, because wavefront error increases, right? So right away, I'd argue the way we quantify refractive error is not particularly good, right? All right. So the most frequently used, and it's not my preference, I'm giving you the most frequently used. Dr. Typus was giving me troubles. He said, why are you teaching RMS wavefront error? You don't like it. I don't, but it's the most common. So I'm giving you a basic lecture here, right? And I'll tell you what I like in a minute. Okay, so the most frequently used metric of ophthalmic wavefront error is the standard deviation of the wavefront error over the pupil diameter of interest. Now, that's a lot to process, I know, but it's not that hard. You know what a standard deviation is, right? How much is this wavefront error varying, right? Standard deviation goes up, it's varying a lot. Standard deviation goes down, it's not varying a lot, okay? And you have to specify the pupil size. So in the next series of retinal image simulations, notice that the degree of myopia measured in traditional ophthalmic terms of dioptric error is constant, and it's only a quarter diopter. Okay. Yeah, because wavefront error increases with pupil diameter, so does the RMS wavefront error. Okay, so notice key thing here, myopic error is not going to change, but we already know that wavefront error is going to increase, right, with pupil diameter. So wavefront error, that number will be going up. That won't change. And pupil diameter will be going up. All right, here we go. 2 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 8 millimeter. No wonder the patient complains when you dilate, right? Mainly because of higher order aberrations, not just put the glasses on this person and clear up beautifully. Simple myopia. All right. So as the RMS of wavefront error increases for any individual Wernicke aberration, retinal image quality decreases. However, the impact for any fixed level of RMS wavefront error, the retinal image is different for each individual Wernicke term. So this is why I don't like RMS wavefront error. I'll show you here the next slide. So RMS wavefront error for each of these terms, different aberrations that Dr. Tybus will be talking about later in the program. So these are Wernicke terms of measures of aberrations, stigmatism, trefoil coma, secondary stigmatism. They all have names, right? So we have a fixed level of RMS error. I have a 6 millimeter pupil. That's a dioptric error of 0.19, and the letter size is 20/40. Notice that each different aberration affects the image quality differently, right? So, but the RMS wavefront error is constant. So, a little caution when you look at RMS wavefront error, and it'll be in the literature a lot, right? You have to think, well, is this the best metric? We can add another metric called the visual Stroll ratio. And notice a visual Stroll goes from 0 to 1, 1 being the best. So look at those images. Which images look the best? Do they have a higher VSS value, or visual Stroll ratio value? Yeah, And remember, RMS wavefront error is constant here. So another problem with RMS wavefront error, just to get you a little more knowledgeable about it when you look at the literature, no eye has only one Zernick aberration. You have a combination. And it's the actual aberrated wavefront is the sum of all these different Zernick aberrations, right? So in real eyes, interactions between these Zernick aberrations are complicated and can increase or decrease retinal image quality. And here's an example. All right, so over here we have simple spherical error, and look at how that influences the chart. Here we have spherical aberration. Look at how that influences the chart. I had these two types of aberration together, have more RMS wavefront error, and look at the chart, got better. We do this all the time in designing multifocal IOLs, right? We put different aberration structures together to increase the depth of focus. Spherical aberration is a good aberration to increase depth of focus at the sacrifice of image quality. But it works. All right. So using visual image quality metrics such as the visual Stroll ratio instead of RMS wavefront error provides better insights as to the actual visual image quality of a given aberration structure. A different topic than the one for today. Nonetheless, it is important to remember that the patients care more about vision than they do an RMS wavefront error number, right? Okay. Spherical and cylindrical wavefront error can be largely corrected with standard ophthalmic corrections. More interesting is the magnitude of the wavefront error that can't be corrected with standard ophthalmic corrections. And these are called the high order aberrations, and how they vary as a function of pupil size and age for the normal eye and the highly aberrated eye. Okay, so we're going to do the normal eye today. So what do we have here? We have three axes: pupil diameter, small, big, age, young, older. I'm over the 70s, so I have to say older, right? And then we have high order RMS wavefront error. Not my favorite metric, but it gives you an idea of how aberrations change. Okay, let's see how they change. Let's first look at pupil diameter. As you get the pupil larger, you have more higher order aberrations. You can't fix with glasses. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay, now let's look at age. I'm sorry, let's look at an old eye versus a young eye. So now an old eye, notice aberrations go up really fast. We have more aberrations than your nice, beautiful young eyes, right? But my pupil's small. I'm old, right? So now let's look at age. So for a small pupil diameter, we're pretty much alike. For a large pupil diameter, you dilate my eye, I'm unhappy, very unhappy. Younger eyes unhappy, but an older eye is typically very unhappy. Okay. So takeaway message on this is summarized by this point here and the arrows that have come up. You start anywhere, you go bigger pupil diameter, you go up in age, RMS error increases. Anywhere you start on this diagram. So if you want to walk away with the message, just realize pupil size gets bigger, more RMS wavefront error. You get older, more RMS wavefront error. Okay, implications of wavefront error. We're getting close to the end. You've survived very well. Implications of wavefront error include the adverse effects on retinal image quality of the wavefront error increases with pupil diameter. Retinal image quality for normal best corrected eye has the highest fidelity for pupil diameters around 3 millimeters. You go over 3 millimeters, your high order aberrations are kicking in, right? The effects of diffraction cause most best corrected normal eyes to have essentially the same retinal image quality for pupil diameters less than 2 millimeters. Okay, so my specialty is correcting these highly aberrated eyes. So I'm going to just show you a taste of what can be done, and I'll give a regular paper on that in a little while. So the benefit of wavefront guided correction for moderate keratoconus patient is illustrated in the following simulations. This patient has 0.564 microns of high order aberrations. That's a lot, okay, just to give you an idea. Some people have more, but that's not anywhere close to normal. As you can see, normal is 0.127 for this particular patient who was in their 50s. So the average age match in normal eye is 0.127 plus or minus 0.041 microns for a 4 millimeter pupil. And we do a 4 millimeter pupil here just to show you that it matters to these guys, you know, even if their pupil's relatively small. Okay. So, whoops, I went backwards, wrong way. Once conventional corrections fail, you can't fix this patient with glasses, right? And they're beginning to complain. What do? You do put on a gas permeable rigid contact lens that replaces the cornea, fills up all the bumps on the cornea with a tear lens underneath. It's called index matching, and it eliminates some of the aberrations. Hey, but the back surface of the cornea is also distorted, right? Right. And it's not a perfect index match. All right. So these lenses mask a significant portion of the high order wavefront air from the corneal first surface, but do not meet the patient's needs, often do not meet the patient's needs. Sometimes they're perfect and they go away happy. You made them better. Remember, we have a lovely profession. You make somebody better, they walk away. They're happy. But did you make them good? That's a different question, right? So here's the simulations. So this is with their conventional scleral lens on. Higher order aberrations went down from 0.56, I think it was, to 0.221. Still 2 standard deviations more than normal eye, right? And that's what it looks like. Hey, patient's pretty happy. 20/20 line, right? But now if you put a wavefront guided correction on them, where you get rid of these high order aberrations that are still there, sphere and cylinder were fixed here, right? But nope, not the high orders. Then they get something like that. Notice the contrast goes way up. And I don't know, you have to decide. They're still ghosting. We didn't do a perfect job, right? And the high order aberrations are slightly better than the mean, but not much. But that's about the mean of a normal eye for 4 millimeter pupil. And you look at that and you say, wait a minute, I see better than that. Image processing. Just don't forget, we have a wonderful brain. Okay, well, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Dr. Typus is going to explain all those Zernicke terms here in a little bit.
You left a lot of holes, right?
I know. So all right.
I'm gonna fill them all in.
That's right. I gotta tell you something about Larry and I.
Don't worry,
We never leave each other alone. And we have a good time. So we're going to do a joint lecture where I'm Ray Tybus and he's Larry Applegate in this program, right? And we're going to exchange every 15 minutes so we can correct the other person's error. Questions?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think that was really an insightful presentation that was really stimulating as well. I've just got 2 or 3 clarity-seeking questions. So the first one is based on, I think it was slide number 4 or 5, where you had listed the key factors in terms of defining the image quality. and I picked up that she had also listed chromatic aberration. So I just wanted to ask, do you think that monochromatic aberration is as equally important as chromatic aberration in terms of defining the image quality? Or do you think it's more or less negligible compared to a chromatic aberration? Take, for example, distortion with straight lines appear curved with the pincushion of that effect.
That's the answer to that.
Sorry.
Yeah. All right, so we have the world's expert on chromatic aberration over here, so he could bow in if he doesn't like what I say. But all of these things I simulated were for 555 wavelength. Okay, they didn't include chromatic. What the chromatic aberration would do is put colored fringes, blue on one side, red on the other side. Okay, and it doesn't. We could do all this in polychromatic light. Okay, it just takes longer to compute, right? And I don't have all those programs working, so I do monochromatic, right? But I'm not as worried about chromatic because we can't really fix it. Not yet, anyway. There's ways to do it, but the problem with a chromatic aberration fix is that it has to stay incredibly stable. And it's the same with the wavefront guided correction. You can't put it in glasses. You got to put it on the eye so that it moves with the eye because you're fixing one location. Remember, you're fixing the tip and tilt at that location. And then if it moves, and I could talk about that for at length, but in general, for this type of keratoconic I showed, a moderate keratoconic, if it moves more than 0.2 of a millimeter, you're ruined. If it rotates more than 5 degrees, you're ruined, right? So I don't know how that particularly, when I took that, measured the aberrations of that eye, when I made that simulation, I don't know if it was perfectly aligned. It might have been off 0.1 of a millimeter, rotated 2 degrees, but it was close. And that's a problem. Dr. Tibus, do you want to add to that? No? No, you don't know what, he was wondering if chromatic aberration really should be included in the analysis.
Chromatic aberration.
Yes.
You know, I think yeah, I agree that we live in a world of polychromatic light. One ought to include all the wavelengths, but some contribute more than others. Some are born more than others because of chromatic aberration. So for complete analysis, one ought to use, you take chromatic aberration into account. That's not a trivial thing to do because these calculations that already showed you, they take a long time to work through that calculation, get those answers, and you have to do it for a whole bunch of wavelengths, and you have to have them all out. But I think there are easier ways, simpler ways, using geometrical optics modeling rather than physical optics modeling. Everything Ray talked about here was really physical optics calculations, all his simulations based on the physical optics calculation. And that takes into diffraction and interference. Those are the key concepts he described at the beginning. But an awful lot of optometric and ophthalmological applications of optics can be dealt with using geometrical optics, simpler theory, simpler calculations, and be easier to take chromatic aberration into account.
Hi, Raymond. It's a wonderful talk. I like it very much. But just as you pointed out that wavefront error varies with the pupil size. And as a clinician, I would like to ask a very specific question, especially in just pointed out in your last case example. Because we are living in the day and night, and the pupil size change all the time. So what specific condition you would like to measure to determine the pupil size, especially the foreign wavefront error?
So I have very strong opinions on your question, okay? So let me talk generically first, because you brought up a very important point that I think needs to change in clinical care, okay? And we tend to treat to the mean. We treat trying to get someone to an average eye and not necessarily trying to optimize for that patient. Okay, so in my world, okay, and it's not the clinical world, I realize because we're not there yet to make it practical for the clinician. Okay, so but I imagine things like what would happen to an infant's brain if they suddenly had pretty perfect vision from the moment they're born. I mean, we learn to process information, right? And if you've got anisometropia of 4 or 5 doctors, like some of these people did, and whoever's presentation was yours, I mean, come on. Or you have the distribution in the normal population. I didn't put up those figures. I can, they're in my paper if you're interested. But there's a wide variation of high order aberrations in the normal population. What happens if I just bring a highly aberrated normal eye back to normal? Do they see better in the end? You know, do they learn to process that information? Okay, so now back to your question more specifically. That's my kind of my wish, you know, is like, oh, let's really find out how this all happens. But practically in my world, and this is becoming an argument now in the clinical world of those of us doing wavefront guided corrections, our philosophy is to dilate the eye, measure the aberrations over the largest possible pupil, make sure the lens on the eye is stable. Don't do anything if it's not stable. Keep fitting till you get a good stable lens, right? Now we have good stable lens on the eye. We got rid of most of the sphere and cylinder, right? Measure the wavefront there because we can correct sphere and cylinder when we make the wavefront guided, okay? And then for any smaller pupil, doesn't matter. They're going to see well. Doesn't matter if they dilate or go something. The argument of clinicians now is, oh, my patient doesn't want to be dilated. They're keratochronic and they're going to be pissed off if I dilate their eye because they're going to leave and they can't see for 8 hours, right? I say, eat it. I'm going to do better for you. Forget about the next 8 hours. Make sure someone drives you home, right? But clinicians are saying, well, it's a lot easier if I just put them in a dark room, let their eyes dilate as big. Well, that gets really tricky because when we do wavefront sensing, and Larry and I are going to talk about wavefront sensing, the data at the edge of the pupil is suspect. And you almost want to eliminate that data right at the edge of the pupil. Well, now you're not really measuring the wavefront there over their largest pupil. You made it smaller already.
Okay, let me make sure my understanding is correct.
Okay.
So you are saying that the wavefront measured in the largest pupil, if we correct those wavefront error, is still good to improve.
No, I wouldn't
No?
say that.
Okay.
There's a fundamental problem with wavefront sensing, and you'll see it when we show our slides. A lot of wavefront sensors don't sample densely. Remember, we want to know what the wavefront area is. And so ideally we measure every ray. Can't do that, right? So we sample and say, oh, things are happening smoothly in between because we have tears and the cornea is basically a nice shape, right? But now some of the wavefront sensors out there sample 20 points and they say, oh, that's a good representation. I'd say absolutely not. Okay, because you're not getting the detail. You can't. And so I like wavefront sensors that sample thousands of points, right? And I have redundancy in data. And one of the things that just really bugs me is that, we're going to fit this nice, beautiful Zernike polynomial that Dr. Tigerson is going to teach you here this afternoon, right? Well, everybody's plotted data, right? Here's a linear thing in your head. Well, here's the data, right? Here's the line. Now, each of those are different. They're not on the line. There's an error. Every one of those data points, unless one happened to fall in the line. And now I'm going to use the line to represent this individual. No, I want to know if my Zernike actually fit this patient's data well. And the only way you can do that is by oversampling a lot. All right, and then say, hey, what if I didn't do a smoothing function? And I just took the raw data. What's that look like? And you want that difference to be small. And if it's not, then you know your Zernike did not represent that wavefront structure and shouldn't go to fit the contact lens until you solve that problem. But the instruments aren't telling you that yet. I want real red lights on there saying, don't stop. don't go any further. We don't have enough information.
Help. You can answer the question, but I'm going to just help Ray answer your question to see if I understand it correctly. As Ray was kind of would argue, and I would agree with him that if you had complete understanding or complete measurement, accurate measurement of the wavefront error, and could correct it completely, then you would have 15. You might take 500 to do it completely, but you've taken the best approximation with the data that you have. And if that works, that's the best approximation for the dilated pupil. And you say, now what if I shrink the pupil down? It may no longer be the best approximation. If you recompute the best approximation for the smaller pupil, it could be a different prescription. Yeah. So that's why in practice, I think it'll come down to the lifestyle. I mean, do you spend most of your time looking with dilated pupils, or do you spend most of your time looking through constricted pupils? Older people have constricted pupils. Astronomers have dilated pupils. There's no simple answer that's universal.
Okay. Yeah, it's not as simple. You had a question. Yeah.
Thank you. I've just got a short question. You were explaining in quite detail why you don't like RMS, and you actually gave good reasons why. So I found RMS is a nice quantifiable value, and you can understand it, and it's nice to see. So what else would you then use in terms of RMS if you don't use RMS?
I'll answer as a scientist first, and then I'll go to a more practical thing. So this is one area I want to see researchers in. This is an area that needs a lot of research to find out the best visual image quality metric, right? There is. I like the visual stroll ratio. It does very well, but I can tell you where it fails too, but it doesn't fail nearly as much as RMS wavefront error, right? So this is an area that is ripe for young investigators to pour their mental energy into and come up with even better answers. But Dr. Tybus shares his code. I use Dr. Tybus's visual image quality metrics, right? They're
works really well.
And it works very well, because why should I go out and think something new, right? But are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. We're just better. And, 5 years from now, I hope to be sitting in this meeting and you say, Dr. Applegate, we got a better metric, and I'll show you why. Right? I'd love it. Right? That would be great. But if you want the code, write that man. He'll send it to you.
Thank you for your talk. That problem with RMS high order aberrations, it gets better if you take a look at each kind of aberration.
That's right.
So, for instance, in this sense, what those RMS spherical aberration means, because this is only one contribution.
Absolutely. No. So let me reemphasize that point. We're going to break Dr. Tybus in his next talk is going to show you how we break down this wavefront error so we can represent it in what's called a Zernike polynomial, right? So, but don't forget, we have individual terms and they're mathematically orthogonal. That means independent. One doesn't influence the other. But the reality is, just as he said, it's a sum of all the aberrations. That's the wavefront error. You can't just look at one, oh, that's the culprit. Depends how it's interacting with all the others. So my strategy is minimize all of them, to minimize the interaction effects. All right, I'm sure we're way over time, but I'm happy to keep going. I love this type of interaction. Daniel.
Thank you so much, Ray. All right. It's 5:02. Yeah. So it's lunchtime. Shall we be back at 3? Everybody happy with that? Okay.